San Francisco/Seattle. I still actually live in San Francisco, although sometimes one could be fooled. So we're going to talk about how your customers actually decide. And that's kind of a tricky thing because, the one clue that we can all have that really works is that they actually buy things. But most of us don't want to get all the way to that point first. So we're going to talk in this about how customers make those decisions, some of the biases that they're subject to and that we're subject to. This is going to be better if you all participate. So there will be several times where I ask you to ask your neighbor something, or I ask for volunteers, and you can shout, and I will repeat, because the more interactive this is, the better. The great thing about humans is that they're all pretty similar. We're all very alike, whether we are buying as a consumer or as part of a massive enterprise. But there are tweaks on the kind of language we use and the things we get hung up on. So that's where hearing from you is going to make this a better talk. So the slides will be available. There might be a slight delay on this because I didn't get a chance to test this. But if you don't get them immediately upon sending this, then you will get them in the next day or two. So subject Startupfest, number one thing you want to learn. If I didn't cover it in this talk, I will write you back and talk about it, because I always want to know the things that people emerge from these talks not getting, because I want to always be making these talks better. So we're going to talk about my goals for this, what I want you to leave with, and that means that towards the end, if you don't feel like you are leaving with these things, just throw up a hand and say, I'm not there yet, because we've got the time to cover it. So we want to understand, what are the human brain startup killers? And we all understand, running out of funding or technical challenges, but there are things that are rooted in how people think and what we believe and the things that we say that will bring down startups any day. And like Alistair said about your mom is not a valid customer, people who want to be polite and supportive to you are a giant startup killer, because if you are around too many of those people, you will have a lot of faith that does not actually map to sales in the end. We're going to talk a little bit about how we recognize when either we or our customers are stuck in bias land, and that's because most bias is something that goes unrecognized. When we think that we're going to use something, we swear we're going to do something, and we don't. That's usually not your customers lying to you. Or if we hear someone who says, yeah, maybe I'd use that, and we want to think that's a yes, that's almost always a polite no. If you're maybe, you should consider that a no. And just having that and recognizing that helps you kind of get out of that trap. And it helps keep your co-founders accountable as well. So these are the kinds of concepts that as a startup team, if you all know that you're likely to fall into this trap, you can reach out to each other and say, hey, that's a polite no. Let's not write that down as a yes. And then finally, questions to kind of dig your way out. So there are things you can ask to get beyond those polite non-answers, or to get beyond the customer who's demanding something. Especially in the early days, you always kind of get that one marquee customer, and then they think that they can get anything out of you because you're a little startup. You should not build those things, because those customers are usually weird and will drag you away from your product vision. So how do we actually ask the questions to get them out of that demanding funk? So that's what we're aiming for. So to start out, I want you to take a couple of minutes and write down 3 questions that you're either already asking your prospective or current customers, or 3 questions that you'd like to ask them. And you write those down now, because we'll come back to them at the end. So take a minute to do that. All right. The reason I ask people to do this at the beginning of talks is because of something called hindsight bias, which is also known as kind of I knew it all along. And I find that in a startup or really in any product building organization, we have a tendency to kind of get to the finish line and be really proud of ourselves and assume that we knew it all along. And every product team on the planet has pivoted multiple times. And when you write things down, not in a digital document that you're overwriting, but somewhere where you're going to go back and look at it, it's really fascinating to see week over week kind of, here's what we believed this week. Okay, here's what we believe 2 weeks later. And you can kind of map those places where you had assumptions that were disproven. And the reason this is really important is it maintains that necessary humility. Because going forward, we always need to remember that our goal is to be smarter than we were last week, but this week we're really not that smart either. So we got to keep going. We don't want to believe that suddenly we figured it all out. So from there, we're going to leap onto something that is probably familiar to any of you who've read any of the Lean Startup Doctrine. Now, apologies to Steve Blank. I've edited his language a little bit. But that customer funnel. So in the early days, your ideal early customer, right? There's someone, they have a problem. They're aware that they have a problem. They've been actively looking for some way to fix this problem. They've actually hacked together some kind of crappy workaround. And then finally, they're willing and able to invest in a real solution. And invest might be money. It is often time or social capital or needing to learn something, but they are investing something. So a lot of people fall out of the funnel at any stage along this path. But I found that, if we're really rigorous at thinking about what does a customer look like at each level, it forces us to face those kind of uncomfortable truths earlier in the process, which is much better than later in the process when it's expensive to fix. I think these are not created equally. I work at Microsoft, so I deal with a lot of teams who have a lot of built-in assumptions, but I also work with a lot of startups, seeing them various places along the way. And I think there's kind of 3 of these are worse than the other 2. So where I see people really get stuck is on the, does the customer really do they have a problem? Or more specifically, do they have this problem? And the specific is that people will say, I want this solution. And you kind of assume that it's because they have a certain problem. And they kind of assume it's because they have that problem too. And so getting to the meat of what is that underlying problem is a giant challenge. And it actually gets worse the farther along you go in a company, because then you have built up a lot of expertise and you kind of feel like, I know what I'm doing now. Or if you've been working with a customer for a while, it starts getting really awkward to ask them what they need. Because, weren't you paying attention all along? Shouldn't you know this by now? So does the customer have the problem? People who have a problem but are not aware of it, it's relatively small. That's not actually a place that trips most of us up. It's kind of, and that next one also, have been seeking a solution, because that can be very lighthearted. That can be well, my commute is really bad. If your commute is bad, you know it. If your commute is bad and you know it, you might have been vaguely looking for alternate ways to get to work, but not actually changed your behavior yet. So we don't lose a lot of potential customers there. Where we do is kind of that next level is, have you put together some sort of solution? And what I'd say is if you are talking to customers about something and they are not currently solving it badly using email, spreadsheets, a whiteboard, sticky notes, or some kind of reminder app on their phone, it's not really a problem. If it is a problem, those are one of the things they will be using. And they might be using it in a terrible, hideous way, but if there is none of that, it's probably not a real problem. Unless maybe if your target audience is 8-year-olds, then maybe, they don't all have these things yet. Although my daughter knows spreadsheets reasonably well, so you never know. And then willing to invest in a real solution. And this is where, if we look at our own lives, how many of us have a creaky step or something in our house that's broken that we just walk around every single day, year after year after year? And so that's what most of our customers do. It's actually kind of amazing that humans get anything done, because we are willing to put up with a whole lot of crap that's just not quite bad enough. And that I think is the #1 human brain startup killer is this is a problem and I don't care enough to fix it. And that is heartbreaking as a founder to kind of encounter someone who is in that situation, but it literally does happen. I had a coworker years ago who lost things all the time. He'd leave a laptop on a plane, he'd lose his hotel room keys somewhere. And I knew a potential startup founder, this is pre-Tile, who wanted to talk to people who lose things. And I set him up with my coworker, and I was like, you should talk to him. This guy loses so much stuff, like he would be a great customer. And the founder got back to me later, and he's like, I had a good conversation with your coworker, but when I started asking him about what solutions he would use, he just looked at me and he said, I just budget about $3,000 a year to replace the stuff I lose. But he wasn't willing to spend, $20 a month to fix the $3,000 a year loss. So, that's a kind of an extreme case, but humans are like that. And like in his mind, it was a known quantity. I'm gonna lose things. I've just budgeted for it. And that was actually a solution because it worked for him. It was something that he could count on. Whereas if he tries this other thing, what if it doesn't work and he still has to spend $3,000 replacing laptops? So people are weird and irrational, and we should always remember that. So let's look at, what would this look like if we had a ridiculously ideal customer? Let's see, that would come? Yeah, all right. I like using fitness for this because it's such an obvious thing. It's like, okay, you've got some kind of weight loss solution. Maybe you're doing like keto delivery meals or Peloton or something. So your most ridiculously easy customer is like Joe. Joe needs to lose weight, and he knows it, and he'll freely admit it. And he's been reading about like different diet or exercise things. He's put in some research, right? So he's researching the situation. He started taking the stairs instead of the elevator, so that's his workaround solution. Maybe he's parking at the far end of the parking lot too, so he's doing some little substitutions. And then he just signed up for a 5K. So now he's put down his credit card, and he's told all his friends about it, so he's made a social commitment as well. So this is like your best possible customer. You don't get very many of these. And if we did, we'd all be tremendously successful. So let's look at what does the inverse look like? So I think a lot of times, the way we get to recognizing good in ourselves is actually to deliberately try and do the worst possible answers, because it kind of frees us up. I've found a lot of times if you ask people, what do you think would be the best approach to something, that's a whole lot of pressure to put on you to come up with the right answers. So I'm not going to do that immediately to you. So let's look at what would it look like if we had an obviously uninterested customer. And this is where I'm going to ask people to shout things in the audience. So you have this fitness product of some sort. What is a customer that's just clearly not going to be your customer? Shout something out. What? So they're in denial. So that's kind of like that second one. That's someone who maybe has a problem but refuses to admit it. It's that guy who says like, well, my pants keep shrinking. Must be this dryer, right? Yeah, so that's your number two, the person who literally will tell you, my pants keep shrinking. Or I was watching Queer Eye and running on the treadmill the other day, and there was a guy who'd not graduated from college, and he was like, but I'm pretty sure it was the professor's fault. Like, that guy's in that second level. He's like, deny. I didn't go to class, but somehow it's the professor's fault. Well, like, what's the level above? Someone who doesn't have a problem. Yeah, someone who's already in shape. You've got someone who's already doing triathlons. They got like 2% body fat. They're infusing themselves with the blood of the young. And sorry, I have to make a Peter Thiel crack at some point in all talks. So so they don't have a problem. Then there's the person who's in denial. What's kind of that next stage? And just for memory, has been seeking solutions. So who's the person who's they're not even seeking a solution?
Well, they don't believe you can solve their problem.
Yeah, that's right. Oh, look around me, everyone's kind of fat, it's this is just what happens when you get older. Or like, oh, I don't know about all that mumbo-jumbo stuff. Like, first margarine was good for you, now it's bad. I don't even want to read anything. This is like all of my family, by the way. Like, I don't want to read anything. Eggs, I don't know, I'll just eat a Big Mac, that must be good, right? Yeah. So then there's that next level, which is, maybe we've got someone who knows they could get healthier, they've done a little bit of reading, but where's that? What's that kind of that next level of, they haven't made any effort?
The doctor tells them they need to do something.
Yeah, so maybe the doctors told them they need to lose weight, but that's it. They haven't looked into it at all. Or maybe the person who gets all the way through that, but they just won't commit. So you've got the person who has read every article on keto, they've got like all the plans mapped out, and you're like, what have you actually done? And they're like, well, I'm waiting for the first of the year. I got a New Year's resolution. New Year's resolution people are kind of like the classic. It's like, hey, they have it all planned out. You will also hear this if you have a product that attempts to solve a problem and someone's like, oh, that's exactly what I need. As soon as you release this product, it'll solve my problems. And you're like, what have you been doing in the meantime? And they're like, well, I'm waiting for a product like yours. No, they will not. They will tell you this, and then they will not actually buy it or use it. And it's tragic, and that's just how it goes. But see, those are pretty obvious. What are the less obvious ones? What would you hear from someone who sounds like a customer, who smells like a customer, but is actually not? Yeah. Yeah. So you'd get someone who's like, oh, I've been meaning to. Like, I've been meaning to run, but it's so hot. That's a good example, because they've shown intent, right? They've actually talked about a thing they're going to do. They just haven't gotten there. What are some other non-obvious, but not a customer, things we might hear?
Too busy or not prioritizing it?
Too busy is a great one, and it's for exactly that reason. If someone's like, I'm too busy to exercise. Too busy and too expensive are both polite lies that you have to dig beyond. No one is too busy to do anything. And for the most part, nothing is actually too expensive. It's just that it's not important enough. Most, the average American watches like 3, 4, 5 hours of TV a day, like some ridiculous amount. Even if you were a busy person and your media consumption is maybe 2 hours, that's 2 hours that you could be investing in going for your jog. You could even watch Netflix on the treadmill like I do. Like, there's a way to work this in. Similarly, if someone says something's too expensive, what that really means is this is not enough value for the price. And the best way to think about that is you think about if you've ever been like at a sporting event and you go to the stand and the beers are like $15. You would never buy a $15 beer normally. But it's 100 degrees, and you're watching the game, and you're kind of a captive audience. And now, the price equation has changed. So just at every step of the way, when you're hearing these people who say, yes, I want this, yes, I'm interested, what we really want to dig down to is, show me. What is the proof of this? And we're going to dig into some of the questions that get to that. One thing I wanted to pause on a little bit is the role of emotions. And this comes from research that the Microsoft Office division did. And they did a whole bunch of people, walk them through products, why they liked them, ask them how they made decisions, things they liked and didn't like. And fundamentally, buying decisions come down to seeking out these good feelings. We like to feel in control. We like to feel productive. We like to feel secure. Like this is going to be okay. Like that old joke about no one ever got fired for buying IBM. That's feeling secure as an emotion. We avoid feeling inadequate. No one wants to feel stupid. That's like the driving force of the universe, I always say. So if you've ever put customers in a situation where they feel stupid, they're not going to use your product. They're not going to say that's why. They might not even recognize that's why, but it will cause that little bit of friction. And we don't like feeling uncertain. So Apple Pay came out years ago, and for years I did not actually use it because there's a weird awkwardness of being in line and having a bunch of people behind you and holding your phone and trying to find the reader and doing this, and then it's not face IDing, and meanwhile everyone behind you is grumbling. And that's not an intellectual challenge. Intellectually, I see the Apple Pay sticker. I know that this will work. I know that it will not take longer than the little old lady behind me is counting out change. But it makes me feel dumb. And what finally made me overcome that was actually going to Europe, where American credit cards don't, they're all confused by the signature thing. And I was like, okay, Apple Pay makes me feel less stupid than trying to explain that I need to sign because we have backwards credit cards. But these things are what actually motivate us. And we will say things like price, or we'll say things like feature comparison, and those are all just a sham. And the underlying thing is I don't want to feel like I got duped. So you will have customers saying things like, I'll buy your product when you add this feature that your competitor has. They almost never need that feature. What they want is to feel like they're not getting ripped off. I don't want to use this less featured thing if I'm going to feel dumb later on. You'll notice in here that this difficulty is sort of orthogonal to this. So if you have someone who's doing something that is difficult or long but predictable, we're actually pretty okay with that as humans. If you've got a long commute but it's consistent, you're probably pretty okay with that. You've made your peace with it. You've got some podcasts, you've figured out your workaround. But if your commute might be 20 minutes, or it might be 40, or it might be an hour and a half, that's intensely stressful, and that's something that we're willing to pay money to get rid of. So a lot of times I've talked to customers who have a terrible workaround solution. And I think to myself, how can they be doing this? They would save like an hour if they switched to our product. But the thing is that they are spending a very consistent hour at which they understand what they're doing at every step of the process. And so they don't actually want to change. So we're going to jump into the first one of these in detail. The customer doesn't really have this problem. And specifically, not so much the customer doesn't have any problem, but they don't really have the one that they think they have. And the way that you will most often see this, once you have some kind of product, even the M'est of MVPs, is you'll have a customer who says, you need to build this. And I have never, in my it's getting to where I'm not going to quote years because it makes me feel old, years of working in product, I have never had someone who is a customer come to me and say, I'm trying to solve this problem. Never. They say, I want this feature, or I want this thing that your competitor does, or you need to build this now. But they often don't actually have it. So how do we figure that out? So we're going to test it out here. Turn to someone next to you. One of you pick an everyday product, just something that you know you're pretty sure that your partner will have heard of. And think of a feature that you want. And then the other one of you, try and ask some questions to figure out why the other one is asking that feature. So I know I've said it, so now don't cheat. Don't say, here's the problem I'm trying to solve. If there's something you hate about Gmail or Netflix or Uber or whatever product, turn to your neighbor and say, I want this feature. So talk amongst yourselves. Hello. I bet it's going to be loud. Yeah. Okay, let's start wrapping it up. All right. The gentleman in the blue shorts, come on up. Yeah. So you can ask now. You should do it. Yeah. All right. Here, get to the mic, actually. Okay. As we started this off, we had a volunteer who asked if he could ask me for a product, so we're going to let him do that so you can see the interaction on stage. So
the product is Netflix, and I want to know if there is certain movie that is available in one country that may not be Canada.
okay. So you're saying the product is Netflix. You want to know if what movies might be available but not in Canada.
I'm thinking of one movie, movie A.
Okay.
And I'm wondering, I know this movie A is not available in Canada, and my question is there any country in which this movie is offered on Netflix?
Okay. Tell me about the last time when you could have used this solution.
Probably 2 weeks ago when I was looking for this movie I cannot even remember the name of. And then I had to look for torrent to find the movie elsewhere. Whereas
We've all done it, yeah.
Whereas I could have found it, use a VPN to see if, for example, if it's available in France. I'm just gonna pretend I'm in France and then get the movie in France.
All right, so if you had this feature already, you could figure out that it's available in France. You could magically make your laptop believe that you're in France, and then you'd have access to it, right? Okay. So the underlying your problem you're trying to solve is you want to watch this movie, and there are restrictions getting in your way. Okay. This one is tricky because there's actual laws here why people couldn't do this. But I'm thinking so pretending that I am now Netflix, I might want to know who else is like you? Who else do you think would benefit from this solution?
Maybe someone who knows what VPN is.
Well, I know what VPN is, but I'm not sure that this is not a thing that I've ever thought of.
They are interested in movies, a lot of movies maybe, and every now and then they come across one name, and it's not the easiest way, which is just turn on the TV and go to Netflix is the easiest way. The harder way is to, okay, this is not here. It's not on iTunes, it's not on Google, so I have to find it elsewhere, so.
Right.
And then it becomes something.
Right, but it sounds like, if I'm hearing this correctly, you need to, have a lot of movies that you watch. You have to, I'm going to take a step here, have awareness that there may be movies that aren't necessarily available to you. I will say, speaking on behalf of much of America, I'm not sure that we know that things exist that aren't in America. So I'd say that the vast majority of us, if it's not there in front of us, don't actually have any clue about that. Can you give me a name of someone else like you who might be interested?
Yeah, my co-founder, Faisal.
Oh, okay. So you'd be willing to introduce me to them if I was going to do some interviews with them?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, great. All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Hey, yes.
Hi, Cynthia.
Hi.
Hey. Ours is a bit more legal. And it actually happened to me this morning. So the product is Uber, and the feature I was looking for, can Uber pick up a friend of mine that's in town and deliver it to my place or somewhere else?
Okay. So the problem is you would like to, instead of saying, I am here, I want an Uber to take me to a certain place, like, my friend is there, and I want you to bring them to me. Is that correct?
Yeah, or a specific place. Yeah.
In the past 6 months, how often would this have been really useful for you?
Pretty much when I have someone in town, They don't necessarily have an Uber. They don't know where to go.
I mean, like how, just to be clear, in the last 6 months, how often have you had someone in town that you might have used this for?
Maybe 3 times. Yeah.
Okay. And if you had this next week, what would that solve for you?
I can get a family member that's not familiar with Uber. I can get a friend that's in town that doesn't know town to meet me at a specific restaurant or specific place.
Okay. So what is, if your uncle who doesn't understand Uber because he's still stuck on the Google, how is he getting to you today?
I have to go pick them up.
Okay. So this would be a big benefit to you because now you don't have to pick people up anymore. Okay. All right. So I'm seeing here the underlying problem is that there are people incoming who don't know how to get on Uber, who probably also don't know how to figure out local subways, and then the solution right now is that I have to go pick them up, and that's something that I'd like to solve for. Okay. Great. So I'm going to talk a little bit about. Thank you. Yeah. Yay! I'm going to talk a little bit about how we get into these. So when we talk about, I want this feature, a lot of times we leap straight to, so in this case, I specifically said start with a product, and that's because that context is very useful. But typically when you're at very early stage, you're not necessarily thinking of that solution first, or you shouldn't be. You're looking for a problem. It's like there is a problem. When people come into town, how do I get them to me? Uber may be the solution, or it may not. That's just a thing that we know too. We know that exists. And that's largely because of something called anchoring bias, which is that the first piece of information we hear tends to influence what we think of going on. In practical terms, this is if you've ever shown a demo to a prospective customer, and then later you figure out that it doesn't make sense to build that customer will still ask about every feature in that demo 6 months later. Well, remember you showed me that it did this. Why isn't it doing that? They want that demo, even if you have talked to them about how, no, actually, the solution we have today is better, it's more functional, it's cheaper. They still kind of want that demo. Or if you've ever done consulting and you've estimated that something will take 3 weeks, and then some kind of massive problem happens, it's really hard to go back and say it'll take 4 or 5 weeks. Even when intellectually your client knows, oh, we completely changed scope on you, they're still anchored at 3 weeks, and so they're still a little suspicious as to why it's going to take longer. This works with pricing. That's why it's always better to price high and lower than the reverse. It works with, if you're going to make something in a funky color, you'd better actually deliver it in that color, because once we see a thing that we actually want it. And there's some fascinating things. If you read about cognitive biases, there's some fascinating things where this works across domains also. So if I were to ask, there's a great study where they asked people in a room to write down the last 2 numbers of their mobile number. So, that could be completely random. Like mine is 99, yours might be 01, yours might be 13. They did that and then had them watch a short, boring film or something distracting, and then later brought out bottles of wine and asked people to write down how much they thought this wine was worth. And the people with low mobile numbers wrote lower amounts for the bottle of wine. So my last 2 digits are 99, so if you showed me that bottle of wine, I'd be like, oh, that's an $80 bottle of wine. If your last 2 digits were 14, you were probably going to say it was a $42 bottle of wine. There's no crossover there at all, but our brains are weird. And so this generally means that I never want to talk to anyone about solution first. I always want to ask them a lot about problem. Even if you already have a product in your back pocket and you are dying to show it to someone, I urge you to spend the first 15 to 20 minutes talking about the problem and saying, let's take a step back. And the customer will want to see that product. They'll be, can't we just do the demo first? Can't we just push back? Because you want to understand that problem first. And once someone has talked about their problem, they are more willing to see the demo and say, oh, here's why that wouldn't work for me. Whereas if you just start with the demo, they nod and smile, and then they don't buy. So anchoring bias, big thing. You might have noticed when the 2 volunteers came up, there's a thing that I talk about a lot called verbal padding, which is basically if someone says, I want this feature, and you say, why, you sound like a jerk. And I don't want you to sound like jerks, because that's not good for customer. You have to have this sort of just to be clear, can I ask why? I'd like to make sure I understand. And that is absolutely critical. And if you would like to, you can't A/B test it, but you can A then B test it. Try it with 2 different customers where someone says, I need this feature, and you say, oh, why? versus, just to be sure I understand, could you tell me why you want that? You will get very different responses. So always with the verbal padding. And you want to kind of take that step back and say, like, what would it do to make your life better? So I always ask, if you already had this, how would it make your job easier? Or how would it make your life better? And what you are looking for here is a story. Because if someone cannot tell you a story about something different that would change, they are not going to buy it. If you say, I would like this, Uber pickup thing, and I say, tell me how it would make your life easier, if you didn't answer, then I wouldn't have to go pick them up. If you're just like, well, it would be cool, you're not actually going to use that. There are lots of things that sound exciting to me, but if you actually ask me about that, I'd be like, I wouldn't actually use it. And so a lot of times people will just say things like, it sounds good, everyone else has it, I'm pretty sure I would need it in the future. Those are not real answers. The other way to ask this, or sometimes ask both in order to get those answers, is like, okay, we don't have this. And first of all, that's an incredibly powerful thing. It feels terrible to tell a customer, no, we don't have this, but it's much better than hedging because we all see through hedging. And so if you're like, oh, well, we kind of have that. Oh, well, it's coming soon. That's just BS, and they all know it. So you're like, you're right, we don't have this today. And that usually makes people like sit up and pay attention because it's honesty, and we're not expecting that from a vendor. And you say, because we don't have this, what are you using as a workaround? And remember I said earlier, if they don't have email, spreadsheet, whiteboard, Post-it notes, it's not really a problem. So if someone says, well, we haven't really done anything, but we're meaning to, again, that's a really weak signal. It's very unlikely that they're going to do this thing that you are promising. The only exception I really see here is when there's some kind of legal or regulatory business. So everyone who didn't have any kind of GDPR solution in place before that law passed, they did end up still having to put all those protections in place because a law was passed. So that's really that forcing function that overcomes it. But most of us are not in that situation. You can ask things like, people say, but your competitor has it. It's one of my favorite things that companies do to startups to try and take advantage of you and get you to build things that they want. People say, well, but AWS has this, but Google has it. I say, okay, you're right. Again, first of all, you're agreeing. People love being agreed with, and so then they'll do a lot more for you. You're right. If you were using it with Google, how would it make your job easier? And you're pushing to that answer again. It's really like, you still need them to answer if I switched, why would my life be better? Because people don't really want to switch. We're all lazy. But you want to know, maybe there's a clear thing. If I switched, I would immediately save 50%. I would immediately be able to get rid of those contractors that I don't really want anyways. Whatever. If someone says, I'll probably need it in the future, you want to pin them down on that. Okay, great. Can you walk me through what you see changing in the future? And this one will catch people by surprise. They'll be like, what? And you said, well, you said that this feature might be useful in the future. I'm curious, what are you planning for the next 6 months? I'd love to know where this might come in handy. And a lot of people will just say, well, and that's where you can say something like, well, great, I'd love to keep in contact with you because I don't want to miss out on something that changes with your business. But it sounds like what I'm hearing is that right now, you don't have a clear use case for how you're going to use this. But I understand that will probably change, and we'd love to keep in touch. That's how you get through that. This will not make feature requests go away, but it will lessen the tenor on them, because once people start saying out loud things like it would just be nice to have, at some level they recognize that they do not have as strong a foot to stand on as they did before. So the customer who says they'll do this thing or use this solution, but you don't really think they're going to. So another exercise. Again, turn to someone next to you, and we'll do the same thing. Do it together, and then someone can do either my habit or your habit up there. So pick a habit that you've been meaning to start, or a thing that you have been meaning to do. And then the other person, ask some questions to try and figure out what might actually help your partner do this, or what is making you convinced they're never going to do it. So go amongst yourselves. Do that for a few minutes.
boats are here. I reserved one for you at 12 if you want to go.
Okay, let's start wrapping it up. And anyone who would like to get up and talk about their thing they've been meaning to start? All right. Okay, hang on a second. Okay. Let's dull roar. All right, we've got a volunteer. So tell me about something you've been meaning to start.
I want to be.
Oh,
It's off. Check. 1, 2. I want to be in bed by midnight every night.
Okay, so you want to be in bed by midnight every night.
Yeah.
Tell me about why that's a goal of yours.
I don't get enough sleep.
Okay. Can you tell me about the last time you were getting enough sleep on a regular basis?
Well, I was 4 years old and on vacation. I don't know. And the last time I tried to set this habit and stick to it, that would be the last time that I was getting consistent sleep, and then something derailed it.
Okay,
As
so it sounds like kind of never.
Yeah.
What are the things you're doing instead of going to sleep?
Working or spending time with my partner who has a different schedule than me, so we're usually up later because it's when we overlap. Those would be the only two things probably.
Okay. Can you tell me about another habit that you have adopted successfully, especially if it was something that a lot of other people might find difficult?
I exercise at least 3 times a week.
Okay. How difficult is that for you, kind of on a 1 to 10 scale?
Now that I've been doing it consistently, it's probably only like a 3 out of 10.
But to get started, where was your starting point?
At start, it was like 8. Yeah.
Okay, that's a big jump. So when you first started, what was, maybe tell me about a couple of things that kept you going, because I know the temptation of just hitting the snooze and not going to the gym.
Yeah, just feeling better, having more energy, just feeling like, by sticking to the habit, it was kind of like positive reinforcement, using like fitness tracking apps and stuff like that.
Okay, so you started seeing positive feedback. You were using fitness tracking apps. Maybe you had a streak you didn't want to break or something like that. Okay, is that right? What other elements in your life might be, outside of yourself, might be keeping you from sleeping more?
I work on a lot of different projects, including a recent startup, and so I have just a lot of things going on in my head a lot of the time, and if I'm thinking, when I lie in bed, I tend to just kind of think, and I can't shut my brain off, and so then I just get up and work more. Because
so it sounds like, in addition to the time crunches of having a lot of stuff to do, what I'm hearing is you're laying down and your brain is still going, and so then, it's like the opposite of hitting the snooze. Like I'm working, I might as well get up and work.
Yeah, exactly. I'm working in my head, might as well type it or write it.
Okay, great. Thank you. Who else? Yeah, someone else get up or do you have a question for him? Yeah, get up. Let's do it.
Hi, my name is Marco Spinaim. I'm with Fan Demand Inc. from Toronto. And the habit that I've been meaning to start is meeting more people face-to-face instead of online. And I'm trying to figure out, with people's difficult schedules, how to accomplish this task. Because everybody is trying to do a million things, trying to meet with different people, but calendar invites aren't doing it for me. And I'm wondering if you have a way to get people face-to-face. Because I think it's more meaningful. I think it's more memorable. I think you set a better tone with your company, and it's important.
Okay, so you're trying to get to meet more people face to face. You said calendar invites weren't working. Tell me about what you have tried.
Just calendar invites, Google Calendar, ZipRecruiter if I'm trying to hire a full stack developer, Indeed. But all these guys are literally, they're just not up to meeting face to face. And I'm wondering, it's a new generation now. People really don't have the time anymore. But I'm wondering how to get back to it.
I'm curious, if I was a recipient, if you were trying to meet me face to face, what would the contact from you look like? Like, what is literally?
I would literally give you an introduction email about who I am, what I do, and what's the value add for you in meeting me.
Okay. Interesting. And people would say, sorry, I'm too busy.
No, some people will say, let's put something in the calendar in the next 2 weeks. Shoot me a couple of available dates. I shoot them the available dates. They say it doesn't work. I shoot them a couple more available dates. They say it doesn't work. I'm just trying to break through. So I'm wondering if you have any advice for me.
Okay. Have you tried any of the calendaring apps, like the Schedule Once, Mixmax, etc.?
No. What are they?
Okay. So there are a handful of apps. I've mostly been using Calendly, but there's Schedule Once.
What's that called? Calendly?
Calendly.
Okay.
Yes, and then there's Schedule Once is another one. Mixmax is another one. Just if you Google calendar scheduling, you'll find some. So that's a thing to try, because what that does is allow you, Calendly, for example, you can open up as many slots as possible. So someone goes to a URL and they see a lot of slots and they can pick it, and as soon as they pick it, it books it on both your calendars.
That's cool.
So that's one thing you could try first. The hypothesis we have now is that calendaring is the issue. And that would be a good way to test that, because if you have solved that and you are still not getting invites, then there is probably a different thing going on. But then, right now it's unclear. Are people really busy? Is the calendaring a hassle? Are they not actually seeing the value? There could be lots of things, but we want to try one and narrow it down.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for your help.
Cool. Would anyone like to ask me one? All right. You want to get up so people can hear you?
A lot of people here. Cool.
Yeah.
Hello.
All right.
All right. Sorry, I thought I was asking you.
Yes.
For,
So I've been meaning to do more blogging.
Oh, okay. And what's the interest in blogging?
I clearly give a lot of talks. I feel like there's a lot of things that I will write up an email to someone on how to do something, and then I think this is 90% of the way to a blog post. Like, it's pretty generalizable, and I just don't. You can literally go to my website. I think the last blog post is from 2 years ago. I tweet a lot, and I just don't blog, but I should.
Fair. And if you tweet a lot, what's essentially what's driving you to blog rather than continue to tweet?
I feel like tweets there are permalinks, but they feel kind of lighter weight, and people don't tend to refer to tweets historically in the way that blog posts get passed around. Some of my old blog posts are still being passed around like 10 years later, and I can't say that about any of my 10-year-old tweets. So I guess it's that desire for somewhat degree of permanence.
And in terms of permanence, and being somebody who's writing quite a bit, you mentioned you had blog posts from about 2 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
How often were you posting at the time?
For a while I was blogging weekly, and then there were like a few, and then there's like 1 2 years ago.
And what was a common theme in all of those blog posts?
It's generally product, understanding customers. I like to do a lot of tactical, like literally, how do you do this thing? Literally, what are the questions you should ask? I find a lot of blogs are theoretical, and that's something that doesn't work well in a tweet because there's just not enough characters.
And if you weren't blogging, say blogging wasn't an option, what other methods of communication would you like to explore where you can get that same information out?
So I guess, my current workaround is this. I go and I give talks and I do workshops. And that's great for the people who are here, but it doesn't work for folks who didn't get to come to Startupfest.
Got it. Should I jump to a solution at this point? I don't know how long I should, because I can ask a lot of questions.
Yeah. Does anyone have? Yeah. Actually, if anyone else, do you want to? Let's open it up. You don't have to get up because that's kind of a madhouse. I'll just shout back if you want. He has a solution for me. All right. You can stay up or you can sit down, either way. Yeah.
One question. So
Yes.
how often do you talk?
How often do I give talks? It's very seasonal because people tend to hibernate and summernate, but I would say on average I give at least a talk a month.
Okay, and is that how often you want to blog and reach out the message that you're passing through your talks to folks?
I like the idea of blogging once a week.
Okay. So one thing you can do is, which can make your life easier, because I see you might have a busy schedule which is making this. So you can use app called Otter, and anybody here can use it. It's called otter.ai. What it does is when you're speaking, as you speak, it makes actually transcribe it very clearly and makes a blog post out of it, like a Word document. And it also records your voice. And it's pretty accurate than probably Google can do. And you can attach some pictures to it. So the time that you may spend to create a blog, about an hour or two maybe, to write everything that you talk, and the key question, you can just select the text and copy paste out of it. And it can make your life easier. Maybe it will take less than 15 minutes for the work that may take 2 hours for you to write.
Okay, that's an interesting thing to try. Yeah. So yeah, I actually do. I use speech-to-text transcription a lot for emails because I'm more often walking and it's easier than typing. So yeah. Interesting. I'll give it a try. Does anyone else have a question? Yeah. What motivates me? I feel like there's so many mistakes that I have made and I would like to save other people from making them. So if it's something like, sending an email and getting no responses, or having a survey and like reading the results and realizing this didn't actually answer my questions at all, that's super frustrating. And I feel like if I figured out a better way, I would like other people to know what that is. Yep.
I had a quick question. So for blogging, is it the permanence or the time constraint that keeps you away from blogging?
That's a great question. So the permanence I'm a fan of, but I think because it's permanent, I feel like it has to be better than a tweet. And so the bar for quality is higher. And so then I think about when do I have time to achieve that quality. So it's time is a blocker. And the reason it's a blocker is because I don't feel like I can just dash off a blog post, because someone might be referring to it 5 years later, and if it was at the tweet level of quality, I would feel bad about that.
Okay, that makes sense. So have you ever thought of, instead of it being blogging, like actually it being vlogging, so that way every talk you give, you have it taped, and then on your page it's like a video instead of an actual thing that people actually have to read?
It's not a bad reason. I feel like the reason I've avoided vlogging is because I personally don't like watching videos. And so this is one of those, this is a founder bias thing, totally. I'm like, oh, I don't like watching videos of people. I just want the transcript. I know there are people who are absolutely the inverse, and
Yeah.
I don't actually know, and this would be a good thing to find out, of my target audience, how does it sit up? Because I feel like most of my consulting work is with big enterprise folks. Are they video people or reading people? I think they're reading people, but I haven't actually challenged that.
Yeah.
You want both? Okay. Okay, last question.
Have you tried using Medium? And if so, why does it make it sticky for you?
Have I tried using Medium? I have tried using Medium, and I find that when I like that it's so aesthetically pleasing. It does make me feel better about writing. So that I think some of the paywall stuff they're doing now I'm not thrilled about, but there is a big thing about that. I think as much as I have used and liked WordPress over the years, it does not make me feel like my content is already good in the way that Medium does. So interesting. Sorry, last question because we're going to go. So we got through a bunch of things, a bunch of reasons, and some of them you'll recognize in these, which is part of it is sometimes we want to understand what the real reason behind something is, and a lot of times when people say, I mean to do this, it's a social desirability bias. And essentially we say things that make us look good. It's because we think we ought to. People will say, oh, I mean to spend more time with the kids. It sounds awful to say the reverse, right? So you might say that even if you have no intention of it. Or I'm going to fight less with my spouse. Of course you should try to do that, except you might not be willing to put in that work. Or I should eat healthier, except, right now I just really want a beer and some fries. So we'll say these things because the inverse sounds terrible. Sometimes we do this on purpose, and usually we don't, which is why earlier about the airport, our airport gentleman, I tried to pin him down on how many times in the last 6 months, because we will often say something in the present that is inaccurate. And there's another great study about this. I think in America they asked a bunch of people how often they go to church, and a huge percentage of people said every Sunday. And then they asked them in the past month, how many times did you go to church? And the median answer was 2. So every Sunday, that's 4, but actually 2. And it was always a matter of, but something came up. Oh, but there was that time my kid was sick. Oh, but there was that time. And there's nothing wrong with that, but the reality is we live in, oh, but that times. There's a spider crawling right in front of me, and I don't know if you can see it, but it's fascinating because it's right there. So if I'm staring, that's why. So we want to get around social desirability bias, because when we ask people and they're saying things that sound good, that's not actually what their wallet is going to map to. And so we want to get to that honesty level. And so you can ask things like, in the past week, how often did you do this? Or you can use a little bit of social proof, which is I know a lot of people have a challenge with blah, blah, blah. How does that impact you? You'll notice that that was a how. I almost never ask yes, no questions, because those are very, very susceptible to social desirability bias. It's very difficult, like it will feel awkward in your mouth, but you can always take a yes-no question and turn it into a how, what, when, why, who. And if you start asking a yes-no question, I would actually encourage you to stop and say, hang on, let me reword that. How would this impact you? Because you say, you've heard, do you want this? The answer is always going to be yes, because it is free to want. But if you say, how would you use this? You put a little bit of burden on me to explain. And so that gets you a lot better answers. The other thing we see is something called projection bias, which is that we predict that our future selves are going to have the same motivations as our current selves. And so if you found someone, for example, who just, like, it's right after a holiday season, they've just spent a ton of money, and right now you're going to ask them about how much they plan to spend for the next 6 months, they're probably going to give you like a very austere answer. Oh, we're barely going to spend anything. We're not going out at all, because they have just exhausted their wallet. 6 months from now, when they've paid off those credit card bills, they're going to have a much different view. If you've ever met someone who did like the Couch to 5K program and they finished their 5K and they're so full of excitement and they're proud, and you were to ask them, hey, have you ever thought of running a half marathon? They'd be like, yeah. Until, that wears off and they start looking at those training schedules and they're like, yeah, I'm maybe not that motivated. So we want to get past that, again, by thinking about what are our current things and how will they change in the future. And what will be different now than in the past. So we want to learn from the past. If someone has never done anything like what they're saying they want to do, they're unlikely to start now. So I'm sorry about your sleep habits. They're probably never going to change. Or it will take a lot of effort for them to change. So if I were selling a sleep solution, I would not count you as a likely customer. And that's just the reality of I can't count on that money. Someone who's thinking of buying a Peloton, but they've done triathlons in the past, they've done Masters Swim, they're probably going to do this thing. Someone who wants to quit smoking and they've already done some kind of really hard habit in the past, more likely to do it in the future. If you've taught yourself a new language or you taught yourself how to code, you're more likely to teach yourself some other endeavor. It doesn't mean that people don't learn and grow, it just means your odds are better. And you're more likely to have to stair-step people through that process. If you've got someone, I mentioned the Couch to 5K program, that's a great example of something that takes people who have never done a thing before and baby steps them to the goal. A lot of times when we have kind of visionary products, we think, if only people do this, everything will be great. But there's a lot of steps that need to go first, as they need to accept where they are, and they need to try something new, and they need to have some moments of uncertainty before they kind of get to that. So, find the closest time that worked. The spider. Bye, spider. Find the closest time that something worked and understood what motivated that in the past. So picking up an exercise habit, that was something where positive feedback was important. So if you were to adapt your sleeping habits, you might want to think about what could I measure success? What would it look like to actually feel better? How could I detect that a week in, this is actually worth the trade-off? Getting a sleep app where you actually get to mark down that I got this amount of sleep, or you use the Fitbit sleep tracker, or some kind of notion like that. Some people set up things to automatically tweet it out. I remember reading about someone who's had an automatic tweet that when their alarm went off, it tweeted, and it basically said, I have to, my alarm goes off at 7:05. If I'm not responding to this by 7:20, the first 3 people to message me get $5. Amazing! Out of bed. That person was out of bed, right? See, that's kind of extreme, but it's not like you need to do things like that forever. That's the kind of thing that kind of gets you over the hump. It's when people say things like, if you see me smoking again, you can, do blah, 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 or I'll dye my hair pink, or whatever that motivator is. Extreme motivators in the short term are great. But if you're the one creating the product, you would need to build that in. So if I was starting from a bunch of die-hard, I don't get enough sleeps, I would have to work really hard to say, what is that ridiculous enticement to get people over that hump? So you can ask things. You've heard some of these. Tell me about the last good habit you picked up. What was the thing that prompted you? Some people have made massive behavior changes, but only based on epiphanies. Those are pretty hard to craft. I worked with a guy in IT years and years ago. He's like giant guy. Went to the doctor. His doctor's like, you're going to be dead in 6 months. Became a vegan and an ultra marathoner. Is still doing that like 20 years later. I looked him up. He's run a marathon. He's run 2 marathons in all of the 50 states. That was an epiphany-based change that stuck. I'm not sure companies can recreate that. But those are rare. Epiphanies are like 5% of behavior change. Mostly it's environmental change or social pressure, and that is something that we can generally architect. So what made you keep going when you didn't want to? Again, this is fodder for your marketing emails or your touch points to people. Is if you know that there are things that will keep people going, that's what your marketing email should be. Not just like, here's a feature, but here's this benefit that you know you need. This kind of clues into the one way that you can sort of ask about pricing. You have probably been told, or you should have been told, that you can never actually ask people what they will pay for a product because we all lie like the Dickens, and it is true. Sometimes we lie on purpose because we're hoping to scare you down into a lower price. Usually we lie on accident because we just don't realize how much things are worth until we need them, like that $15 beer at the ballpark when it's already hot. The one way you can kind of do it is by analogy, and this is like the habit thing, where you say, tell me about other related solutions that you've bought. And years ago when I worked at Kissmetrics, I would ask people, tell me about the other solutions you use for your company. And the people who only named free products became non-prospects. They'd be like, this is not our customer base because they will never pay us for anything because they are literally not paying anyone for anything. Other people would say things like, oh, we are buying user voice. Oh, we are buying MailChimp. Or on the extreme end, we're buying Salesforce. I was like, okay, those are enterprise customers. But so if you know that someone is already using some kind of solution, whether it's a software product or a gym membership, and then you kind of get a sense of how worth is that to you? Oh, what does that allow you to do? How worthwhile is that? What if your gym membership suddenly raised their rates by 25%? What would you do? You're asking about another product, so people are more likely to be honest. And then you can usually look up those prices. So if you know that someone is using Survey Gizmo, you can look up how much that costs a year, and you get the sort of sense of, okay, here's a thing that is valuable to them. They paid this much money. That gives me a ballpark of how much I can charge. So it is the only way that I've found that you can get anything resembling a real answer without just putting up something and asking for credit cards. So the last one, customer has this problem, but it's really not that important. So let's have a couple of volunteers. Who can give me like the Uber for dogs pitch of their solution? And I mean seriously, a sentence. Come on up. Yeah. American Express for startups. Okay, that sounds good, right? Because that's my default response, right? Yeah, that sounds good. Okay, sure. That's going to be my response. Someone else. Bras built for you. I love that. That is a slogan that is great. All right, so bras that are custom fit. I love that too. Especially love that. Let's see, one more. 21st century refrigerator for your energy leftovers. I'm not sure I understand that. Okay, so somehow you're making me more green. And this person over here. Okay, I'm not enough of a sports fan to say, yeah, that sounds good, but I'm sure I'll do the next best thing, which is like, oh, I bet someone would really use that. These are all the polite things that you'll hear, though. It's like, oh, yeah, like my nephew's really into sports. He'd probably like that. These are the things you hear all the time. Sure, who's over there? We can lift any building on Earth like no one else. I don't have any buildings that need lifting, but that sounds really impressive. Alexa for manufacturing. Alexa for manufacturing. Alexa, make me a bicycle? Okay. All right, so the thing is, like, at face value, any of these things sound potentially cool. And they likely are very cool, but of course that's what we're going to hear. So for everyone who has these products, we're all subject to confirmation bias. And this actually works both ways. We want evidence that our ideas are right, and so we are more likely to look for them and sort of ignore or forget information that contradicts us. On the other side, customers do this too. We look for what we want to exist in the world, and we kind of ignore if it's not possible. So I have a story that I've told a few times about last year. Before it became more common, I got an email from, I think it was Hyatt, saying, do you want our digital key so that you can just unlock your hotel room door using your phone? And you don't have to talk to anyone. And I read this marketing email, and I was on my way to Seattle on a late flight, which I often am, and I was thinking to myself, yes. Like, the last thing I want to do when I get off the plane is talk to a human, even if they're lovely. I would just love to go to my room and, like, do this and go in and crash down on the bed. So in my mind, I was like, yes, this sounds great. I did not for a second stop to think about the realities of things, which is like, how is this magically going to work? And so I signed up, and I was like, okay, sign in using your loyalty points. Like, oh, what is that number? Okay, I got to go look that up, so I have to do password reset, get my like Hyatt thing, type it in. Now all you need is the app. Like, oh, I need to download the app. And I'm at an airport, so I'm using crappy airport Wi-Fi, trying to download the app. And I get the app, then I sign in, and then I'm like, all right, so is this going to work? And it's like, since this is the first time using it, you will have to stop by the desk and show ID so we know it's you. And I was like, and if I had stopped to think for a second, I would have realized, of course it has to work that way. Because do I want some loser on the internet, like, downloading an app and being able to get into my hotel room and steal my shit? Of course I don't. Of course, at some point I have to, like, show an ID and prove that it's actually me. Otherwise, it would be terrifying. Imagine the potential for stalkers. Ugh. But in my mind, I was so willing to believe, like, the promise of just let me into my room, that I didn't ask any questions whatsoever. And then as I started thinking about it more, I also started thinking about the realities of how I travel, which is that I am on the go, and by the time it's the end of the day, my phone is like at 2%. And I was thinking about, imagine the stress of walking back to my hotel room being like, is my phone going to make it? Is my phone going to make it? Oh, no, it's not. I'm going to have to go downstairs anyways because my phone is dead, and now I can't get into my room. But customers don't ask all these questions. That's our job to ask all these questions. And so when we say, yeah, that sounds great, we don't tend to ask, but wait, how's this actually going to work in real life? We get halfway down the path, and then instead of actually talking to Hyatt or complaining or saying you should really change your initial email, I just talk about it in these talks. And now other hotels are doing it too, so I think the experience is getting a little bit better. But your customers, when they run into these things that bug them, they don't email you and helpfully say, like, by the way, you should change it in this way. They're just like, screw it, I'm not going to do this. Silently, and you never know. So we also have something called loss aversion bias, which is that we would rather avoid a loss even if it means passing on a potential gain. So we would rather, not spend that hour exercising, even if we have a whole closet full of clothes that would fit and be great if we just, got a little bit tighter. We would rather not take that new job with a lot of potential because we're really good at our current job, and we know that there's going to be a period of time in the new job where we're the new person who doesn't know anything, and that's very uncomfortable. And so there's a lot of people who stay in jobs they're not happy with far beyond their expiration date. I know a lot of parents who put off, trying to do potty training or get kids off a pacifier, because even though there's a big gain, especially with potty training, there's a time for the next 4 months when you will be chained to a bathroom or, always within 2 minutes of it, or else bad things will happen. And that loss is like, let's just put it off longer. There's a related thing called status quo bias, which is why when you have customers who have terrible workarounds, they'd rather stick with that because it's the status quo. So when we hear people saying, yes, I want this, or yeah, it sounds good, or no, I'd never, there's a couple of things that could be going on here. And it's our job to figure out which of them they are. So the customer is saying maybe the right things, or maybe they're saying, no, I don't know about this. I don't know about this building lifting thing, right? What's going on there? It could be that I'm not the target customer, right? I am probably not the target customer for the building lifting thing. It might be an amazing idea. It's not an amazing idea for me. It could be that a solution is not that great. So there have been plenty of things that sound good on the surface, but it's like it's not enough for me to change what I'm doing today. It could be that like this is something that's okay, but it's not really making the customer's life better. So in the case of the bioenergy storage, that sounds in the abstract like something that makes life better. I don't know how it would make my life better. It might, but it's not immediately clear to me. And as humans, we're kind of selfish. We want the thing that makes our specific life better right now in an obvious way. And we can be brought along to a longer out future, but it's tough. So what do we do about that? We ask some of the same questions. In the past month, how often would this have made your life better? Like on the bra case, in the past month, how often would it have been easier if you had a better fitting bra? Oh my God, every day. So probably a good target customer. Tell me about how. Well, I could talk about certain clothes that don't quite fit right, and then I'm like sitting there in the mirror, like looking at myself. Is this okay? Should I change tops? It's an annoyance, and it's an emotional annoyance, and those are the ones that we pay to get rid of. So good. On the other hand, if you were, maybe you're one of those VCs who's like, oh, my wife would use this. Those are the worst, by the way. It's like, okay, well, in the past month, how often would this have made your wife's life better? Maybe I could talk to your wife. And this guy probably has no idea how, so it's not you're not going to get a lot of useful information out of that. Walk me through the whole process of how you do something. So a lot of times the solution doesn't sound good because it's a very small piece solution. So if you think about the Uber example, right? When I use Uber to get from point A to point B, it's simple. I'm standing at point A. I push the button, the car comes to me, and it takes me to point B. But what if the process of transport involves, like, I have a relative, they're going to land at this point. I don't know the exact time that they're going to land at this point, but I would really rather them not have to wait around. So we need to figure out this person's incoming at this time. How are they going to know where to meet the Uber? When am I going to, call this up? There's a whole process involved. And so what is really ideal is something where it's equivalent to pushing a button and, your uncle shows up at your door. If you think about the whole process of your uncle coming to visit, you're trying to think about, okay, so I have to take an afternoon off from work, and I have to get in the car, and I have to figure out when to avoid traffic, and there's a giant solution area involved there. So understanding what that whole process is really helpful. One of the things that kind of irks me about things like something like Uber Eats or like any of the food delivery is that getting the food from the restaurant to my house is only part of this process. And if any of you live in a household with picky eaters, there's like a whole step first, which is like, okay, no one wants to cook. Okay, what is everyone going to be willing to eat? Okay, what is the dish? What is this one specific dish? Which restaurant can make me udon with nothing in it? Okay, is that a restaurant that'll deliver in less than an hour? Okay, can I feed everyone else off this? All right, now I'm going to figure out what everyone wants and put in the order. And like in that amount of time, I probably could have cooked for myself. And that's maybe an extreme case, but we all have cases like that. Grocery delivery, it's not just that the food shows up at your door. You probably have to go through your pantry and your refrigerator. What are we almost out of? What's coming up this week? Do we have a party? We need to order more stuff. Or a friend coming over who's lactose intolerant. We need to deal with that. There's a huge process. And then, of course, once the food shows up in your door, you have to put it away. And I'm not saying that Instacart's going to come and solve that whole problem, but I'm saying that if I think about the amount of pain, the actual grocery delivery part might not be the bulk of it. It might be that I have a half hour of work here and a half hour of work here, so saving that half hour seems suddenly much less valuable. So these are the kinds of things you can get at. If it's kind of the, hey, I know someone who'd like this, like our Netflix film friend, I said, like, who would get value out of this? Not because I was trying to be accusatory, because I'm trying to kind of size the market. You think about like the gaming platform thing. I'm like, oh, I'm sure I know someone who would like this. You might want to say like, well, who do you know? Let's be specific. How would this fit into their work or life? You're like, oh, your nephew who plays games a lot. How often? What kinds of games? Is it a social thing or is it a decompression thing? Do they have limits on how much they can play? Or how much money are they spending? You're not going to ask all these things, but you kind of want to know like, is gaming a thing they do casually or is it a big part of their life? And then, would you intro me to that person? I've heard a lot of people who say, oh, I know someone who would like this. And then you kind of ask who, and they might name a friend. But then you're like, oh, I'd love to talk to your friend. They're like, yeah, I don't know about that. And what that tells me is I'm not really convinced that this would be valuable to my friend. Because if I have a friend who's got a problem to solve, I don't have to be convinced it's a 100% match. If you sound pretty good, I'm going to intro you because I know that this friend really needs to solve this problem. If I have a friend with a nice to have, I'm not going to subject them to some, founder who's going to call them up and talk to them on the phone for however long, even though you should all be doing that all the time. So that gives you that sense of how strong is that. So now let's come back to the 3 questions you had at the beginning. How would you rewrite those questions? And I'm not going to make you do it right now, but look at your questions, and if we have any volunteers of questions you asked that you would think about differently now. Or questions that you would want to ask now that you have heard what you've heard for the past hour and change. Yeah, go to it.
Coming from a sales school many years ago, one of the important factors that I think is sort of left out of here is basically the relationship building or the casual conversation that comes with understanding and knowing the needs of your customer. So I think this is something that would probably reveal a lot about the customer and give you a lot of detail in terms of what type of questions. Also, when the relationship is developed, and this could be done, in a digital space or personally, the customer is more likely to try your product and to buy your product, to try it out in a number of stores if it's a retail space or so on, and only because of the relationship that sort of exists. So I think that the casual conversation is very, very important. We've always sort of, a strategy always developed, and at one point we had 100 sales reps across North America, and one thing I always promoted was the fact that you spend 75% of your meeting time, even if you have to fly to a destination for one meeting, spend most of that time building the relationship and 15% talk, and then that quarter of the time talking about the product.
Yeah, and when I've worked with sales teams, and I talk about questions like this, a lot of times I'll get kind of an initial pushback, especially if they're talking to a customer, and the customer's saying, I want this feature, and I'm saying, you can't tell them yes. You have to just start asking questions. And I've always gotten initial pushback, and I said, look, try it out and think about how does your normal conversation go? Customer says, I want this feature, and you say something like, we'll put it on the roadmap. And they say, well, when is it going to happen? And then you can't really give an answer, or you give an answer that then people are going to be mad about later. It's not a very satisfying conversation. Versus if you can ask that, okay, that's interesting. I'd really like to understand more about why you want it. Now you're talking about them. You've pushed it back to, this is your problem space, and I want to understand it. I want to learn more from you. And the feedback I've consistently gotten is salespeople say, I'm able to stay on the phone longer when it's customers who maybe wanted to get off the phone with me. Now I've got them talking about themselves. And it's kind of it's that same line. It's relationship building without kind of the casual conversation, but it's product focused. But you're not asking in the way of what do you like about our product? It's more tell me about what you're doing. And often it goes into tangents where, maybe it's outside of your product area, but that's still good to know. And sometimes that means a product line extension, and sometimes it just means that you have a better relationship with this person. So we've got a few minutes left for questions. I'm curious if anyone still has some customer behaviors or questions that you're I don't know how to get this out of someone. So if you have them, come on up to the mic and we can answer them. Yeah. You're closer, so I'll start with you.
Well, I have to agree with both of you. I really like his input. It's true that sometimes you're selling something, and if you don't have the personal contact, or you see sometimes your client buying another product which is not as good as yours, but because he knows someone, etc., and he's a good friend or so forth. What kind of I had, kind of a pushback, is sometimes there's 2 partners, and some of them would say, oh, my partner is already working on this, or he has a relationship, or he pretty much decided what he wanted to, and you cannot go through the first partner to discuss with the second partner. So it's always he's pushing back the no excuse to somebody else.
I think one of the things that's been valuable, so the question, someone's already working with a partner, they've already got a solution. I think there's still a great learning opportunity there of kind of changing tactics. And as someone who has never been in a sales role, that's often one of the first things I say is I'm not trying to sell you anything. In fact, I can't even sell you anything. So when I'm in that situation, what I want to know is okay, it sounds like things are working for you today. That's great. I'd love to know, though, if you don't mind, like, tell me about how you're using this. Tell me about how it's valuable. Tell me about the good things about it. And I'll say things like, I'm not trying to change your mind. Like, I'm not going to pressure you at all, but I would love to know for other customers how we can emulate some of that good feeling you're getting. And the reason this works is that it's almost a form of bragging, because I have made this choice. In fact, it's another bias here called choice supportive bias, which is once we've made a choice, we tend to really stick to it and like it. So if you're using a competitor product and I come in and say, look, I'm not trying to change your mind, I'm not a salesperson, but I'd love to know more about why you like this product so much, because honestly, I'd love for our product to inspire that kind of love. People then feel like now this is attached to me, and they're like, I'll tell you why. And a lot of times you get really good insights out of that. And it tends to be, things that you wouldn't necessarily think. Like, oh, when I go in, the homepage is so easy, or, I can bookmark this report, or, I really love their summary emails, or things that you might not have heard otherwise.
Hello again. So my question is more so about asking the questions around pricing, especially when you're asking all these pain point questions and trying to understand what possible solutions can be. How could you incorporate pricing or understanding what their willingness to pay is as part of that interview process?
So understanding willing to pay is really, really tough. The things that are the closest I've found is trying to get them to quantify that pain in terms of people hours. So do you have a dedicated engineer working on this? Do you spend a lot of time, making sure those emails work before you hit the send button? Are you spending extra time in testing, customer support? And you need to do a little bit of research ahead of time so you're asking the right questions. But what you'd want to kind of get at is, okay, walk me through your process today. Oh, how long does that take? Oh, how many people are involved? And then you can kind of at some point say, so what I'm hearing is, you've got a full-time engineer dedicated to this, and if somehow this was magically solved, and I love the magically solved because then you don't have to get into details, you'd be able to utilize that engineer on something else. And so people will never do a one-for-one equivalency. They're not going to say, oh, okay, an engineer is 150 grand, therefore I can pay you 150 grand, but it gives you kind of a ballpark. So if you come back and say, okay, it's 60K, and they're like, that seems really expensive, you're like, well, we talked about how you have a full-time engineer dedicated to it. I'm pretty sure, you're clearly not paying your engineers 60K. I mean, we know you're still making money off this deal. Then you can have a more reasoned conversation. Whereas if you come out of the blue, it doesn't work. But you need to get them to craft that for you. You can't say, you're probably spending 20 hours a week, because people push back at that. It sounds too salesy. But if you get them to walk you through and quantify, then you get that ballpark. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Talar, and my question has to do with how to have these conversations with the customers. I'm seeing that all the questions are open-ended, and so now I'm wondering if an online survey is the kind of thing that we can use or rely on in terms of getting information from our customers, and if so, how? Because often the logic we had behind building a customer survey is we don't want to take too much of their time, they won't give it. Will they really take the time to answer my open-ended questions? What's your take on that? Do you have any experience that you can share on that?
Yes.
Or is it just to put it aside and really go face-to-face?
So if you Google, should I send a survey, CindyAlvarez.com, I have a series of blog posts on this. But I will summarize, which is to say, surveys are best reserved for the time when you know the questions you should be asking and you know the potential answers. So people will sometimes write in open-ended, but not often. So the more you can do a multiple choice, the better. But if you don't know what the right options are for A, B, C, and D, people will just guess the closest fit, or they'll just pick C to get rid of it, and so you don't actually know anything. The exception I've found is if you've already built a relationship, and you've had an open-ended conversation, or you've had emails exchanges that make people feel very welcomed into the fold, then they will tend to write, but otherwise not so much. I have found a lot better luck with If you're going to do something that is not, emailing and asking for an interview, which is kind of high overhead, something like Intercom, where you've got a chat-based session. And this is something where if you've got customer support people and you can train them on some of these questions, just like, here is a question. In startup days, I would do something like having a question of the week. So everyone who wrote in with a tech support question, we would send them the answer and then say, if you don't mind, I have a question. I was hoping you could answer it. Then people are very primed to be helpful because you have just helped them. And so then I would get written responses. But I find that surveys, if you're asking things like, tell me about, you're just not going to get that from a survey. If nothing else, because people are self-conscious about what they write and they don't want to look dumb, in speaking, people are much more willing to be open.
Well, then, if I were to follow up with that, based on your experience, if we did do an online customer survey with more of a, checkbox, yes/no kind of answer, would you trust any of that data that comes out of it?
I would trust data for factual answers, but that's a pretty small subset of what you're probably trying to find.
Okay.
I remember, a long time ago, before things kind of standardized, doing surveys on things like monitor display. And that was useful to kind of get okay, of our customer base, how many of them are looking at this on laptop? And it was actually a huge percentage, and that ended up changing a dashboard design because we realized even though we had a very startup-heavy audience who had giant monitors, that they were like, oh yeah, we're almost always looking at your product on our MacBook Pro. So for factual answers, you will get it, and it's probably trustworthy. For opinion answers, you will get a lot of social desirability bias.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Hi, Cindy.
Last one.
Oh, yep. So my name's John, and I'm wondering, before you hop into your questions and you're doing that kind of soft conversation, is there a golden topic you hit other than the weather, sports, or where they're working?
Personally, I am a terrible small talk person, and so I usually kind of jump right into what's the problem we're trying to solve. I might ask them something like, what's been really challenging this week? Or, something kind of along those lines. It's much more product focused, but I just don't have a good barometer for what that is. And I find in tech, I'm not a sports person. I don't know if this person is a runner or a reader or a cook. So, yeah, I kind of jump into the problem.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah.
I'm afraid you got to
Yep.
stop now,
Yep.
unfortunately. Cindy, would love to talk to you if you get a chance. You want to cut around. Cindy, you have a pedal boat ride with your daughter in 7 minutes. Did you know we have pedal boats?
Pedal boats.
So thank you so much.
Thank you.